Welcome to Takeoff, a Points and Miles podcast by 10X Travel. I'm your host, Bryce. Today, I am joined by Matt and Travis. How are we doing today, gentlemen?
Doing well. I am excited to be back. I unintentionally have kind of missed a couple of the last episodes, so enjoying getting back into the swing of things, I suppose.
Hopefully you got to miss them to go on a nice flight.
Yes, some of those are the case. Did I tell you how I went grocery shopping in Paris? And that was a trip, essentially?
I think you told me.
You didn't tell everyone else. Yeah.
You told everyone else listening.
Okay, so Points and Miles let you do crazy things. So I literally flew to Paris last month for one night. Actually, no, it's not even on the ground for 24 hours. But I flew to Paris for one night to surprise my wife for her birthday. She was already there. And I showed up for the last day of her girls' trip. And we stayed at the Park Hyatt in Paris, which was awesome. Wandered around, went to an awesome grocery store, loaded up on French butter and champagne, came home, and that was it. So literally went to Paris to go grocery shopping. Oh, and also surprised my wife for her birthday.
Yeah, Matt was not thrilled when I drew the comparison between that and when Kim Kardashian flew to, I believe it was Paris, to get a slice of cheesecake and was criticized for it. But yeah, welcome back, Matt.
Thank you. Butter and champagne beat out cheesecake any day of the week.
For sure. Well, before we kick off, I want to remind you that if you are still new to Points and Miles and not quite to the point where you're flying to Paris to buy butter, or you just feel like you could use a refresher, we recommend going back and listening to episodes 1 through 6 of this podcast. We cover some of the basic fundamentals of Points and Miles. And for any other lingering questions, be sure to join our Facebook group, the largest Points and Miles group on the planet, currently over 350,000 members. In today's episode, we're going to be talking all about Qatar Airways QSuites. This is one of the most asked about products that we see at 10X Travel. Our award booking team tells us this is one of the most requested products that they get. QSuites is considered to be one of, if not the best business class products in the sky. And we're going to talk about how calling it business class is almost deceptive. It's that good. We're going to talk about what makes QSuites so special, our own experiences with QSuites, how to book them, and more. So if you are interested at all in flying in this QSuite, which I'm guessing everyone who's listening has probably seen it at some point. There's been a handful of viral videos that at least I have seen from QSuites. Almost always when you see it, the first reaction is, how do I fly that? This episode is going to answer that question. So let's start out. What are Qatar Airways QSuites and why are they so desirable? Well, as I said, Qatar Airways QSuites are considered to be one of the world's best ways to experience business class. They are some of the most private, comfortable, and luxurious business class seats in the sky. Now, we're going to keep on calling them business class because technically Qatar Airways QSuites are business class. Qatar Airways does have some first class products. There's fewer of them. But if you're just looking at pictures of QSuites or sitting in the cabin or experiencing it, it really doesn't even feel accurate to call it a business class product. It features entirely private suites, some of which can be conjoined to 2 or 4 people flying together with your beds kind of combining to a full bed. It just feels absolutely luxurious when you're on the plane and incredibly different from many other business class products that you might have experienced when flying internationally. QSuites in particular feature top-tier in-flight dining, fully lie-flat suite seats, swanky amenity kits from Diptyque. I had to look up how to pronounce this because I'm pretty basic. Diptyque. Comfy sleepwear and slippers from the White Company. Ambient mood lighting, which let me tell you is fantastic on the plane, but has one downside. Makes it very hard to photograph that cabin in like low purple and orange light, but feels fantastic when you're on there.
You don't like feeling like you're flying in a club at 35,000 feet or whatever?
Oh, I love it. But I did find my own
review.
Get the
lo-fi house music going and it'll be perfect.
Oh, I mean, consider that a product request, Qatar. That'd be amazing. And actually an underrated perk, access to perhaps one of the best business class lounges on the planet. Definitely one of the biggest. The Al Marjan business class lounge. I might be pronouncing that wrong and my apologies if I am. Absolutely gargantuan business class lounge, which is a lot of fun. 2 restaurants. I think there's a little hotel in there. Has a game room, multiple floors, etc. We'll talk about that a bit too. All of that available to you if you are flying on QSuites and surprisingly doable with Points and Miles for a handful of reasons that we'll get into in a minute. So QSuites tend to be based out of Doha, which is the headquarters for Qatar Airways. They fly to some of the world's top bucket list destinations, including the Maldives, Paris, so you can get your butter, South Africa, Thailand, and more. Now, Matt, can you start out here by telling us what makes QSuites truly special?
All right, so there are a couple different things that make the Q Suite special. I think this product came out maybe 5 or 6 years ago, so it's been around for a while, but that does not mean it's old by any means. They were one of the first to kind of pioneer a closing door in business class, not necessarily the first, but probably one of the first in terms of a wide scale, and that has become a thing. Obviously, now more and more airlines are doing it. I think it's a little bit gimmicky. It's nice, but a little bit gimmicky, but some people rave about it and love it. So Q Suites has that to be able to have privacy in your suite. Um, they also have a do not disturb indicator. Again, might be kind of gimmicky, but some airlines don't have this, so which is kind of nice because the flight attendants very strongly respect it to where you might not get waked for a meal if you have your do not disturb light on, because that's literally what it's for, and they're kind of following directions. So note that you will be able to get a restful night's sleep if that's what you're wanting, and not get woken up for breakfast if you don't actually want to because you have your light on. The real kind of fun with Q Suites, though, is if you're lucky enough to snag space for multiple seats, which is possible, and you're flying with either a partner or a group, meaning 2 or 4 people. Three would be fine. Might be a little weird, and I'll tell you why. Because the layout and configuration of the seats, the center, it's a 1-2-1 configuration, seating wise. So one on either side of the aisles, and then 2 in the middle. But the 2 in the middle are offset row by row. So one seat or one row of seats in the middle, they are literally what they call honeymoon suites, where you're sitting right next to your traveling companion, and the row behind them you're offset, and so there's a big gap in between the two. If you understand how the seats laid out, it makes sense because the people behind you's feet would be kind of right next to you, but they're encapsulated in their pods. You don't actually notice them, but they are actually right there, which is kind of a weird thought to think about. But the honeymoon seats are great because you're literally sitting right next to your partner and flying companion, and so the Q Suites have a nice thing where it's sort of a retractable divider. So if it's someone you don't know, you can kind of pull the divider out. You don't have to look at them or see them. But if it's somebody you do know, you can kind of put it back, and that way you'll be able to literally make up the bed to when you lay the seats flat, and it's not quite like a double bed, but there's really no divider in between you. So it's as close to getting the queen size bed in Singapore first class as you can get in business class, which is kind of fun. But that's great if you're flying with a companion. If you're flying with friends, which I'm very jealous because I helped some friends book this a couple years ago, and I should reference this by saying that I'm very much having imposter syndrome on this entire episode today because I'm the only one here who still hasn't flown Q Suites.
Hey, you said it, not us.
I know. I'm just getting the disclaimer out here now. We had a South Africa trip booked during COVID that we had to cancel, and it was on Q Suites both ways. And I still haven't rebooked it. I don't know why. But anyways, if you're flying as a group of 4, the way the Q Suites also work is they kind of stagger forwards and backwards. With that, they have another layer of dividers between rows in the middle seats. So one of the honeymoon seats faces backwards, and one of the non-honeymoon suite, the standard divided business class rows faces forwards, and there's actually dividers in between the 2 rows. So they call these like the quads, essentially, because you can put down multiple dividers and have everything open so that a group of 4 can basically interact with while you're flying. Have dinner together, play card games, whatever you'd like. We'll throw a picture up here on so you can actually see it, because it might be hard to if you're just listening and not watching us on YouTube to visualize this if you've never seen it before. But it is pretty snazzy, and it can be tricky to find space for. But if you can find space for 4 and you're traveling all in business class, this would be the way to do it.
Yeah, when you close all the doors, it almost feels like a train cabin compartment. And the fact that you can only see the folks that you're traveling with, and the doors are rare in that they're actually high enough that most people who aren't of Travis and Matt's height wouldn't necessarily be walking by and like make eye contact with you. So it does feel like a truly private little tiny suite in the sky. And of course, this is a business class product. Usually I'm used to flying business class and like looking at people with that look of like, don't look at me. I am not my best self at the moment. I just woke up and had 4 glasses of champagne before I went to bed. But in this case, it's private, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it was really interesting when Qatar decided to released the QSuites, and they actually recently announced QSuites 2.0, which it's pretty much the same layout, just a few. It's more like an update than anything completely new. But when QSuites came around, it's not that Qatar was a bad airline, but most people, when they were thinking of the best airlines out of the Middle East, were thinking of Emirates and Etihad, specifically for their first-class products. You think of aspirational first-class products. If Emirates isn't on that list and Etihad apartments aren't on that list, then what else is there? Maybe some Singapore. The Middle Eastern airlines were really well known for their luxurious first-class products. And while Qatar had first class, they weren't really in the same tier. But ever since launching QSuites, I feel more people find that have found Qatar to be more accessible and sometimes even more desirable to fly. I believe their slogan when they launched was "First in Business," and they've pretty much nailed it.
That's pretty creative.
Yeah,
That is. That's great.
Whoever did that marketing was really, really smart. And they nailed it. It's one of my favorite business class products. There's a reason why it is so popular, so much so that I've seen people try to fly through Doha to get to Europe, something that could be a 7 to 10 hour trip to Europe. Instead, adding quite a bit of extra time just to get to fly QSuites is kind of interesting.
I've contemplated it. Not gonna lie.
I would do it.
Yep, haven't booked it, but I've contemplated it.
We know you haven't.
Maybe next time I need to go.
Yeah.
Well, fair enough. Maybe next time I need to go grocery shopping, I'll just work my way through Doha.
I mean, honestly, like you could probably do all of your grocery shopping at the Doha airport. The lounge is great, but it's a pretty cool airport.
It is.
It's
got the bear with the lamp, that famous like sculpture, art installation. Not sure what to call it, but yes, it's incredible. Now, Matt talked about how QSuites, like the thing that it's most known for is perhaps the ability to create the suites, right? The honeymoon suite, lower the dividers, or even the quad suite if you're flying with 4 people. But there are still those 2 additional seats by themselves on the windows, and those should not be overlooked as well. Matt, could you tell us about who should maybe consider choosing those, and are there any other major downsides to be aware of with the aisle seats?
Yeah, if you're traveling separately by yourself, then privacy is probably of major importance here. So you should be noted that the seats out on the single seats on the aisles by the windows do stagger. So and they kind of offset. So one row of seats is very tucked up close to the window. Then the row right behind it is going to be offset, staggered very closely to the aisle. Still have sliding doors, but much less privacy. So if you are traveling solo, look for the ones that are up by the window. Use some tools like Airlopa or other sort of online seat map tools to be able to kind of put in the flight you're going on. Not only just check the availability with the actual flight you're booking with the airline, but also just to kind of get a hang of which seat you might want to get based on the availability on the flight, so that you aren't stuck in the aisle. It's not the end of the world if you're kind of stuck on one of those seats that's offset by the aisle, especially since they still have the doors, versus something like United Polaris, where if you're stuck on the aisle, you are very exposed. But you might still want to make sure going into the flight that you know that.
Yeah, I would almost go so far as to say, like, be a good fellow citizen passenger, and if you're traveling by yourself, maybe leave the honeymoon suites for those who are looking to combine them, because otherwise you risk the very small chance that someone's like, no, let's combine this with a stranger. I think I want to snuggle up next to someone I just met.
Are you big spoon or little spoon?
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing to keep in mind on your seats as well is the seats closer to the window face backwards, whereas the seats closer to the aisles face forward. If you're in the middle, the honeymoon seats face backwards, the aisle seats face forward. And some people...
Such good intel from somebody that has flown this product.
Surprise. Some people don't like flying backwards, or some people are kind of averse to it if they haven't done it before. I personally actually prefer it. So it's a win-win on QSuites. I get to sit backwards, be close to the window. My wife and I, if we're in business class, we both would rather have the window seat. So we'll just take two different window seats, not sit together, so someone else can have the honeymoon seats. We'll see each other on the ground. But
There we go.
yeah, I like the rear facing window seats, especially for sleeping, because like maybe this is just in my head, but I feel like the plane is kind of angled up just a little bit when it's going. So if you're facing backwards, your head is a little bit lower than your feet, whereas when you're facing backwards, right, your head is closer to the front of the plane when you're trying to sleep. So your head is a little bit above your feet. And I might totally be making that up, but I feel like I can feel the difference.
And now I'll be able to notice
I like
it.
flying backwards. I think it's I flew on. I keep talking about this trip for my grocery store shopping experience, but I flew backwards on the way home, and I hadn't done it in a couple of years. And it's only different on takeoff because you're slung forward because the plane obviously is going backwards, but then on landing, it almost makes the landing smoother.
Yeah, it's nice.
I don't know if I have a preference, but I just love the idea of having a preference. Like, oh, I like to fly facing backwards, which subtly implies I don't fly in economy. So take that for what it's worth. But anyway, speaking of experience, Travis, you have flown QSuites at least one time, right? Can you tell us about your experience, where you flew, and which seat you chose, and anything about it?
Yeah, I've actually gotten to fly it 3 times now. Every single time from Houston, which is one of the nice things about being in Houston, is Qatar flies QSuites to my home airport. So I first flew it to Cairo on a trip to Egypt. So Houston to Doha to Cairo. The other time I flew it, I managed to fly a round trip to the Maldives last year. So I flew it from Houston to the Maldives there, and then Maldives back to Houston the year or on the way back. So 3 different times. Not gonna lie, it's awesome to be able to get to the Maldives with one stop from my home airport. It's not something that Columbus can say for sure. Yeah, you never know. They might.
We are building a new airport.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think Qatar is going to care that we are, but we are.
Well, consider this the official petition, Qatar, to send QSuites to Columbus, Ohio. But until then, Houston, I've said it before, we've got it made. I honestly had a great experience. It's my second favorite business class that I've ever flown, but don't take that to mean that it's not great. It's much closer to the first place than it is to the third place.
All right, wait, pause. Interjection. We have to guess what Travis's number one is.
Bryce,
do you have a guess?
I don't. Right on the spot. You go first.
I'm guessing ANA.
Oh yeah, the room. Yep.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Also backward, right? Is it because you fly backward on that one?
They do also have
you?
backwards, and I've flown it both ways. And I
just
of course I prefer it. I prefer sitting backwards on it as well. But it's honestly deciding which one is my favorite is nitpicking. There's very personal reasons why ANA is more, right? Like I'm a side sleeper and the setup is great for side sleepers because it's wider at the front. Like it's very, very minor details that separate ANA from Qatar. What separates Qatar from whatever comes in third is much bigger than Qatar to ANA. And I think a lot of people would not hesitate to put Qatar as their first.
I just want to look out for your well-being, Travis. Here, make sure you don't hurt yourself with all this flexing that's going on.
Don't worry.
I mean, I
stretched before we recorded.
I'm sitting here wondering if it'd be socially acceptable for Travis to go on any other business class flight, recline the seat to lie flat, but then put his head in the footwell and sleep backward. And then
sorry, guys, I prefer to fly back.
Yeah, it's just I'm used to this. I don't know how I can do it any other way. But yeah, if you do that, do share a picture because that'd be fun. Yeah, I have also flown QSuites one time. It was in 2019, right before COVID. I went, had to position from Columbus to Washington, D.C. Then we flew to Doha in QSuites and then flew business class in Qatar, non-QSuites, down to Cape Town. But did get a nice little 9-hour layover at the Doha airport, explored both of the premium lounges there, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But the entire experience was incredible. Things I remember from it are that their food and drink was fantastic. Tons of choices, way more than you see in any other business class product that I've experienced, including like kind of like fancier stuff. And I also remember the fact that it was very hard to photograph cabin because it was low purple lighting, which was fantastic to be in and very clubby. Yes. And that was not a digital ad, dear listeners. That was actually Matt's voice. So someone splice that up and make a hit out of that. That'd be great. But fantastic product, relatively easy to book. They do fly to a handful of airports in the United States. We're going to talk about that here next, where I'm going to turn over to Travis to tell us how to book QSuites with points and miles.
Yeah, booking QSuites with points and miles is surprisingly not that hard. The downside of that means that it can be tough to find availability because it's not that hard. Historically, there have really been three ways. I shouldn't say historically. Now there's three ways to really book it. You can book with Avios or Avios or however you want to pronounce it. You can book it with JetBlue, and you can book it with American Airlines. Yes, there are other programs that you can book it with as well, but these three are the most popular ways to book QSuites. Let's start with American Airlines. Historically, American Airlines was the most popular way to book QSuites. They used to have the most competitive pricing for QSuites, but things have really changed over the past year or so, especially really since Qatar transitioned to using Avios as its loyalty currency. Unfortunately, in the past 6 to 12 months, QSuites flights that are bookable at the saver level, so should be available to book with American Airlines miles, just aren't showing up on AA. And even if you call in, phone agents aren't able to find them. So it seems
Even the Australian AA call center that always seems to be the loophole for getting all these obscure availabilities because they can see but nobody else can.
I haven't tried that one. So Matt, when you're looking to book your first QSuites flight, I'll let you know. Yeah, so unfortunately, it's got harder and harder to book them with AA since you can't book them over the phone or online. Really, the only kind of option you have to booking QSuites with American is looking 11 months when American opens up their schedule. One thing that some people, so I have not tried this myself, but when researching this that I've seen has given some success is applying married segment logic. So what's married segment logic? A lot of times when we're talking about how to book an award flight, we're telling you start by looking at the nonstop. So in my case, Houston to Doha, or Bryce mentioned DC to Doha. A lot of times we recommend looking for that first and then seeing if you can add on what we would call the married segments, the other pieces to the puzzle. Weirdly, sometimes this actually opens up additional availability. So you might not see Houston to Doha, but if you say start in Austin and say Austin to Houston to Doha, it'll show up. So this is another little trick that I've seen reported as working for some people. It's not a guarantee, but if you've got American Airlines miles and you're wanting to use them for QSuites, then it's one option that you can try. Unfortunately, if none of those work, you might be out of luck using your American miles. Now, that being said, American miles have also really lost their popularity for QSuites because no banks transfer to American, at least right now when we're recording this. So the only way you can earn American miles is with an American Airlines co-branded credit card. So you either, like, people are in the boat where they either have American miles or they don't. And there's really not a good way to bridge that gap. And with the addition of Avios, which we're going to get to in a second, it's pretty easy to earn Avios and just book directly with Qatar itself. So that's becoming the more popular way. But let's say American Airlines is out. What's your other option? You could also look at JetBlue. If you happen to be a JetBlue loyalist who's earned a lot of JetBlue miles, you can book Qatar for 70,000 JetBlue True Blue points from the US to Doha. Now, the downside is JetBlue will charge you more for additional segments. So, whereas with American, if you're, say, going to the Maldives or South Africa, it's a bit more region based. So, rather than saying you're flying from Austin to Houston to Doha to the Maldives, in each of those 3 flights, pricing individually and basically adding those 3 amounts up, they just look at it as Austin to the Maldives, one price. JetBlue does the opposite. They would say, oh, Austin to Houston costs 10,000 points. I'm just making that up. I don't know what it actually is. Houston to Doha is 70,000 points, and Doha to the Maldives is another 30,000. So you would pay 110,000 in total. So JetBlue, good option again if you've earned some JetBlue points and you're wanting to use them, especially if you're looking to just go on the direct flight to Doha. But otherwise, it doesn't make as much sense to transfer your bank points to JetBlue to book through their program when you could go with Avios instead. And alternatively, if you're looking to go beyond Doha, it also just doesn't really make sense versus looking to use Avios. In summary, if you're looking for American or JetBlue, American, it's going to be 70,000 miles from the US to Doha. Anywhere else in the same area of the world, Africa or the Maldives, it'll typically be about 75,000 miles. JetBlue, it's going to be 70,000 miles on that nonstop, but it's going to surpass other options if you're looking to connect beyond Doha. So I've said a lot about American Airlines and JetBlue. Does anyone else want to take over for Avios or Avios, and you can just decide how you're going to pronounce it?
I will take it. And as I mentioned before, last time I was at Heathrow, they said Avios was sort of how they pronounce it. So I don't
Isn't
know.
it obvious, darling?
Obvious. Yeah, isn't it obvious? Yeah, precisely. Anyways, yeah, so this currency name Avios might be familiar, especially if you're new in the space. Well, and that's because 6 airlines now share it. British Airways, Iberia, Aer Lingus, Finnair, and Vueling, and Qatar, obviously. So they all essentially have, I don't know the back end logistics, but there's some relationship, some entity that either owns all of them or some sort of partnership. All these airlines seem to buy into other airlines, which is very confusing to me, but whatever. Anyways, here we are with 6 pro airlines now using Avios. Yeah, like Travis was saying earlier, typically from the US to Doha, you can book QSuites for about 70,000 Avios through Qatar Avios. Ultimately, where you would book, there is some I believe there's some variance depending on the programs you might book through in terms of taxes and fees or whatever, that there may not all be the same. So you do, when booking, need to just kind of double check or maybe run a couple searches. But you'll typically pay about $100 in taxes and fees with those 70,000 Avios booking through Qatar Avios. You can definitely combine Avios between some of these programs, which is nice, especially if you've got some orphan miles or maybe there's a transfer bonus from one program that you want to take advantage of. So you almost move points twice to take advantage of it. Regardless, probably the most common way to do it is to transfer from British Airways to Qatar Avios. You'll obviously need an account with both programs, and then there's a whole workflow for how to do it, which is nice and easy. I actually did this a couple weeks ago, booked a domestic American Airlines flight with Qatar Avios because the award chart had not changed. And then literally a week later, it changed for domestic AA flights. So I got lucky there, but I transferred some British Airways Avios because that program had changed their award chart, and the Qatar one didn't change for maybe a month or a couple weeks later. So it was cheaper in that particular case, but I think they have leveled out, although it's not 100% the same. But again, that's for booking an American Airlines operated flight, which is a little bit different than what we're talking about here today. One kind of key to note, if you are looking for award space in the Qatar program, you do want to have just a few points in your account. They won't let you search without them. Kind of annoying, but we've seen success with as little as 1 point in your account showing up and failure when you have 0 points. So you don't have to move over thousands or hundreds even really, but you do have to have a balance for some of these searches to show. But not to fear, Avios are extremely easy to earn. Virtually every flexible credit card program and currency transfers to one, and by default, all of the Avios programs, since you can combine them, which is extremely lucrative because since there are so many flexible currencies transferring to the same program now, there's almost always a transfer bonus between one of these programs to the other. So if you're going to make a redemption and you carry a wide stash of flexible currencies, like we suggest most of our audience does, this kind of works to your favor. You could transfer from one program to, say, British Airways to take advantage of a 30% transfer bonus, and then bump those straight over to Qatar, and you've gotten some bonus miles that you may or may not have already had thanks to the transfer bonus. So be a little bit strategic about it and use the fact that they have so many transfer partners to your advantage.
I believe on our episode about Avios, we made the claim that they are the single easiest loyalty currency to earn. And as you're saying this, I'm reminded of that. You can earn hundreds of thousands of these points potentially very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yep. And presumably, whoever the group is behind Avios, it's like IAM or something like that. I don't know entirely what it stands for. Presumably, they're not done, partnering with other airlines. They're up to 6 now. One would think that they're continuing to want to grow that. So, it might not be too long here before there's 7, 8, 9 other airlines that participate in this program, further strengthening the currency, especially with how easy they are to earn. So I'm pontificating there and trying to predict the future, but we'll see if in time that comes true. Who knows?
Conference realignment is happening in frequent flyer miles as well. Who's going to get Avios next? The Big Ten or the SEC?
When do the pilots of airlines start having NIL deals?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah. So that's a quick kind of summary on the Avios specific part. A couple other notable things. Qatar does open award availability 361 days out through its own program, which is earlier than it releases to partners, which is typically about 330 days is kind of where we see the sort of industry standard there. So you can have kind of a month head start on trying to snag availability through Avios versus trying to book through someone like American Airlines. And like Travis mentioned, that's gotten harder over time. So now having this sort of increased capacity and ability to book by transferring to Qatar Avios can be a benefit there in snagging availability versus not.
So summarizing all of those options, now that you've heard us talk about it, American Airlines Advantage, pros, 70,000 miles to the Middle East and only a few more miles to other, we'll call it desirable destinations in the same general region. Cons, availability isn't really showing up that reliability anymore, and there's not any bank transfer partners at the time of recording this episode that you can use to really top off your Advantage account. JetBlue, the Pro, is 70,000 miles to Doha. The cons are segment-based pricing, so if you add on any connections, you're going to end up paying more than other programs anyways. And Avios, the pros, and there's a longer list of the pros here. Typically, there's more availability. You can transfer from virtually every bank partner. They're easy to earn, also 70,000 miles to the Middle East. And you'll see the earliest availability through Qatar's own program. The cons, you got to have 1 mile in that account to do the search. So
is that even a con?
Got to pay to play, baby. Got to pay to play.
I had to come up with something. When thinking of cons, I had to think of some reason to make you think why you wouldn't use Avios. But honestly, I don't know about y'all. If I'm booking Qatar now, I'm using Avios.
I see no reason not to.
Yeah, especially with transfer bonuses. I mean, it just it not makes that 70,000 like 53,000 if it's like the 30% transfer bonus to British Airways or Iberia, which common happened. And that's a heck of a deal to get from the US to the Middle East or beyond.
Yeah, on a product that is absolutely fantastic. Like, we're not talking about like Iberia here. This has got to be sorry, no shade to Iberia, but this has got to be one of the best values in points and miles in terms of how many points and miles you use and the thing you get in return for them. That's incredible.
Yeah. And one of the nice things too is Qatar's no slouch with the routes that they offer. They fly to a lot of destinations in North America. You've got, let's see if I can do this in one breath.
Are we going through the list in one breath? Let's go.
I can definitely do this in one breath, but yeah. Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, LA, Miami, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, DC, and Montreal. I'm actually kind of surprised they don't fly to Toronto.
Yeah,
I agree. However, I do need to call out the fact that you abbreviated 2 of those airports. So the judge rules that you do not win the prize for completing the naming of those all in one breath by technicality.
I'll take it. I double checked. No Toronto, which is surprising.
That is surprising. Or Vancouver. Maybe that's not surprising because that'd be more of an Asia or Pacific hub. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah. They used to fly to even more. I know they used to fly to Philly, I think. Mm-hmm. So maybe they also used to fly to Toronto as well, and just kind of consolidated some of those routes. But the nice thing there is that it means that there's tons of options. Yeah.
And all of these airports are easy to position to wherever you are in the US with lots of options. So you're not stuck. Like, I can literally only pick up this product from New York or LA, and I live in Wichita. Yeah. So I'm got a long way to go.
Yeah. And generally same price as if you go to LA, you're paying the same price as if you position in New York. You don't have to choose one or the other for points and miles reasons.
Yeah.
Other than not choosing Miami because you're going to get stuck there when your flight is inevitably canceled.
You'll probably get Qatar going there.
Hey.
Yeah. Well, tell us, what is Qatar?
Speaking of Qatar, Travis. Yeah.
I thought you were going to.
I can take this. Oh, no. You want it or you want?
Go for it, Bryce.
Okay. So Qatar is a term. It's an unofficial term. I'm sure the airline doesn't love it, but it's a term that's used when you book a QSuites flight and there's a equipment change that results in you not flying on QSuites, which is very sad when that happens. It's rare, but it does happen, and there's really nothing you can do to prevent it. So
now, why would someone book a Qatar business class flight and not get QSuites?
Well, it's not on every plane, of course. You do have to look out when looking at the seat configuration. Look for the 1-2-1 layout. The old one is 2-2-2, which I suppose you could have another snuggle buddy there, but it would be dramatically less fun, and you'd probably have to step over them to get to the aisle. So look for the 1-2-1 layout.
We'll put a picture up here now of the other Qatar business class, so you can kind of see the difference. Still not an awful way to travel. And this is the product you flew from Doha to South Africa. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Did you know going into that flight that your second leg was not going to be QSuites, or were you Qatar'd or just surprised when you boarded the flight?
Kind of a funny answer. I knew, but I neglected to tell my wife. So we boarded, and she's like, "What is this?" And I was like, "This is our next flight." And she's like, "You didn't tell me it's not the QSuites." I'm like, "Oh, sorry." So yeah, it was fine. It wasn't QSuites, but it was fine. So yeah, in particular, the Airbus A350s all have QSuites. Most of the Boeing 777s have QSuites, and some of the Airbus A350s. The 900 version would have QSuites, but the A380 does not, the Boeing 787s do not, and the older Airbus A330s do not.
The A380s not having QSuites feels like a miss to me. However, Qatar does not fly. They don't have that many of them. But still, that one feels like a miss to me to not have QSuites on it.
Yeah, I went down a rabbit hole as to like why that is, and they'd leased some of those from other airlines temporarily, and they're not planning on keeping them, so they weren't going to retrofit them. But yeah, that does feel kind of odd, right?
They do have their first class on the A380s, but they don't fly any of them to the US. So
no,
and there's just not many at all.
One interesting thing though is, and this is a little bit unrelated to getting Qatar'd, but an interesting thing is if you're staying within kind of the Middle East and Egypt, if you're flying business class, Qatar only sells it as 2 classes. So they sell it as first. So if you're connecting, you won't pay any extra miles for it. It's kind of like a domestic first class ticket in the US. That's not going to be better than a long haul business class. But what it means is that you can get access to the first class lounge in Doha.
Al Safwa.
But let's talk about lounges.
This is a pro tip. Well, I was gonna say, this is a pro tip that you mentioned Middle East. I know Muscat and Oman, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai. You mentioned Cairo. Are there any others that you know of that would work for this? But even those are four strong choices, and you're literally talking about adding a 45-minute to an hour segment, maybe an hour and a half tops,
Yeah.
to kind of unlock the first class access, which gives you access to the Al Safwa first class
Yeah,
lounge.
those would
Yeah.
probably be the most common ones. I mean, looking on the map, there's a handful of airports in Saudi Arabia that you would get access to. I'm not quite sure if Turkey makes the cut, but um, yeah, there's a number where if you're staying in the same general region, yeah, you can be flying business class on your next leg, but it's marketed as first and go to the first class lounge. But also,
Well,
even if you're not, you can just buy your way into the first class
Yeah, I was
lounge.
gonna say I did
Yep.
that. It was like $110 a person, which that's not chump change, but for what you get, it's pretty incredible.
If you've got more than 3 or 4 hour layover, which is very common in Middle Eastern flights, or flights through the Middle East, I should say, that are connecting, you absolutely have to pay to get access to the Al Safwa first class lounge. We'll throw some pictures up here. It's unbelievable.
They both
Speaking as the
are.
person here that has not been to
Yeah.
it, of course, but yeah, both business class lounge is very, very good, but the first class lounge is kind of next
Yeah.
level.
Before we get too far down the lounge rabbit hole, I do want to kind of hop back to being Qatar really quickly, just kind of highlight a few things for people. We mentioned most 121 have Q suites now. That's true, but between the two seats next to each other, there was a 121 layout. And if you're unfamiliar with what we mean by 121, it means you look at a seat map, there's one seat at the window, two in the middle, one at the other window. There is another business class version by Qatar that is a 121 that is not Q Suite. So you kind of want to check using, like Matt mentioned earlier, Aerolopa Expert Flyer tools to pull up the seat map to be sure you're getting Q Suites. And there's some destinations in the US where anecdotally, I hear it happening more to people. Boston and Atlanta are the two that really stick out to me, where people get these equipment swaps more frequently to a plane without Q Suites. So even if you plan out in advance and it was Q Suites when you booked and selected your seat, just be a little cautious, Boston and Atlanta, or at least be willing to accept and understand that risk that you might get an equipment swap and not end up with Q Suites.
And there's really nothing you can do to, I mean, you can kind of complain afterward and ask for some miles back and such, but there's just not much you can do from my understanding.
Yeah. And it usually happens day of. So it's unfortunately not something that you have any time in advance to really prepare for.
Yeah. So should we go down the lounge rabbit hole now?
Yeah. I'll let
Can we talk about the lounges?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's two of them in the Doha airport, which the Doha airport, first and foremost, is quite large, very big hub of activity. But when you are flying on Q Suites, you have access to the business class lounge. That's the one I mentioned earlier. Let me find the name so I don't butcher this.
It's the Al Murjan.
Al Murjan,
is the
yes.
business class one, and Al Safwa is the first class one.
That's right. So you can get free access to the Al Murjan, the business class one, which is, I mean, probably one of the best lounges that you'll ever experience if you're listening to this. It is absolutely massive. I think that lounge might be bigger than the Columbus airport, and I'm not exaggerating. It is literally bigger than the Columbus airport. There's like 150-foot ceilings, multiple floors, like different restaurants. Like it's
hotel.
Yeah, it's just outrageously big. And like fantastic amenities. Like you're going to find places spread out. And as we mentioned, most of the layovers that you're going to see on these itineraries are quite long. So that does make quite a difference. But the first class one, which you can pay like $100 per person to upgrade to, or in my case, I did both. I would encourage you to try them both. But the first class one is also huge. Still has like the 150-foot ceilings. They do have like a fountain that's like slowly dripping like a waterfall from the ceiling. I remember when I was there, I timed myself walking from one end to the other. I made a video, and it was like 1 minute and 41 seconds at like a normal walking pace to get from one side of the lounge to the other. It was incredible. 2 restaurants, like high-end champagne, white tablecloth service. They had a little like hotel in there where you could get a room with a shower and then take a nap. I did that. It just fantastic all around. And as Travis mentioned, I highly recommend paying $100. Go see the first class lounge. You're going to have plenty of space to spread out. You're going to enjoy yourself. It's really something to experience.
Looks like the current price is $165 for the cash upgrade.
Inflation has come to lounges too.
Yeah, exactly. Even in the Middle East, there's inflation.
Still worth it.
Even if you're choosing not to pay the $165 to upgrade, which, if it's a long enough layover, might definitely justify it. But the business class lounge is still spectacular. Like Bryce highlighted it. It's super comfortable, tons of seating, tons of amenities. Got sushi buffet, but like steaks. It's better than some first class lounges. Like I like it better than like the one that comes to mind for me is the British Airways Concorde room. If I had to spend time in one, I'd rather spend the time in the Qatar business class lounge in Doha. So it's a fantastic lounge, and if you choose not to upgrade, you're still going to have a really comfortable layover for sure.
Yeah, you're not going to sit in the business class lounge and wonder like, oh, like how do I get out of here? Like I want to leave. I'm not happy here. Like you'll be happy there. Don't worry.
Doesn't one of them have a swimming pool? Is that the first class one where you can swim laps?
So the business class one has a large fountain that looks like a swimming pool. And I imagine if you're brave enough, it could be a swimming pool until you get thrown out. But
I think one of the Middle Eastern lounges has a swimming pool. I thought it was
wild.
Yeah. But all right, I'm quickly Googling to see if I can back it
up. I Googled it, and it says that there is one at the first class lounge. So
interesting. I must have
Bryce really missed an opportunity.
Yeah.
I got to go back. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. How to get kicked out. Anything else, gentlemen, on QSuites lounges or anything before we kind of wrap this one up?
No, we'll just...
I think we've about covered it.
We'll pause it. We're all going to go and fly to Doha in QSuites and upgrade to the first class
from the swimming pool.
Go wrap up from the swimming pool.
Yeah, wrap this up.
I imagine the audio would be difficult in such a big space. I remember hearing echoes. Like the lounge is so big, you could hear echoes. Like who? What? Like how does that happen? But anyway, if flying QSuites sounds like fun to you, and which means like if you're a human being, we have tons of resources to help you master that in all of the world of points and miles. The first one is that if you would like some help booking QSuites for yourself, I suggest that you become a 10x Travel Plus member, where you receive 2 one-on-one consults with our staff each year, help plan out your strategy for booking QSuites, and 1 free award booking every year where we will actually go and find it for you. Be sure to check out My 10X, our free tool to help you manage all your points and miles in one place, and be able to see My Next Card, a feature that takes the guesswork out of finding the next best credit card for your wallet. And about to launch now for the second year, our Southwest Companion Pass mode to help you navigate the complexities of Companion Pass here at the end of the year. Be sure to join our Facebook group, where over 350,000 people are coming together to talk about points and miles, ask questions, share their knowledge, maybe share videos of them walking across lounges and see who has a faster walking pace. And finally, enroll or brush up on our free course that teaches you how to do all this and travel the world for next to nothing. You can find that linked in the show notes or at 10xtravel.com/course. For all of us here at 10x Travel, I'm Bryce. Thanks for listening to Take Off, a Points and Miles podcast by 10x Travel. We'll see you next time.